Really, one BTC.news is an implementation on top of the Ordinal News Standard, where we see this as a kind of a two-part thing, where we have the Ordinal News Standard, which I'll dive into and we'll talk a little bit about and some of the technology that runs behind it. And then one BTC.news is what we've built on top so that we can start showing our own curated feed of the news and start telling our story based on things that have been written to Bitcoin. And it's very exciting because I think one of the things we came across, when we talked about this last time, is this is really a new paradigm when it comes to storytelling and news in general. Things that are written to the ledger of record cannot be changed, they cannot be deleted, and they will exist forever. And that gives us a really cool way to actually get the information out there and have confidence that we know the story being told. And yeah, let's dive right into it. So to start with, everything here is built on this Ordinal News Standard. Very basic concept, very similar to what you see with SATS names. And just to dive into the documentation a little bit, the formatting for this is very similar. You'll see that we have...
Jason, excuse me for a second. Can you increase the font by 1 or 2 sizes?
Of course.
Thanks. Boom. Looks perfect. Thank you.
All right. So the format that we're using here is very similar to what SATS names does, where we have a tag, the P tag, that tells us what protocol we're using. In this case, it's ONS for the Ordinal News Standard. And we designate an operation for posting the news. That's not required, but we're anticipating that there will be other operations that we're going to want to do in the future. So this is included inside of every news inscription at this time, and it gives us a chance to do some differentiation at the indexing level when we're looking into things. So the Ordinal News Standard itself, all it really requires is that we say, hey, we're using the ONS protocol, and this is the title of my article. But if you had only those two items, you're not really sharing a lot of information. So there are some additional things that you can add on to this as optional fields. And this is a lot of what we're using currently to share the news and write things to Bitcoin. So you'll see you can include things like the URL, the body of the post, which could be in text or Markdown or actually in HTML. We have an option to list the author, which currently is just a string to represent somebody, but we do have some ideas around this author address and using signatures to prove that the author is the poster. And this is actually implemented currently through the Siegel blogging app on the Stack side. And we're also exploring how to do this on the Bitcoin side and do some of the signature work there. So the idea would be, if I'm going to write something as wobuddy.sats, if I want to do several different inscriptions and have them all tie back to me as the source of this information, then we want a way to cryptographically prove that and take advantage of what these technologies offer us. I mean, we have wallets, we have the ability to do signing, we have a lot of new standards that are coming around what we can do from the wallet level. And I think that's going to end up being very useful for creating checkable facts that allow us to know this is who it's coming from and this is what it's saying. So you can see it here, we have a post example with some of that extra syntax. And based on that, we can then turn around and display that in a really consumable format. So the way we're doing this now, everything is powered by Cloudflare, and it currently uses the Hero API on the back end. But we didn't want to just use the API. We wanted to build an indexing layer on top of that, both to help with response times and just to limit the number of requests that we have to make. Every time you view the news, rather than having to reach out to the API every single time, you're actually reading from the Cloudflare KV, the key value store, and getting the information directly from there. If the information doesn't exist, it will go grab it, store it, and the next time you're able to read it much faster, and it will actually index the information and the content for any inscription. But if they do follow this particular protocol format, there are some additional features that are available there. So the API itself, you can find at inscribe.news/API. Quick little list of some of the different endpoints that exist. And we can get into some examples just to show a little bit of how this works. So to start with, we have two main namespaces set up in Cloudflare. One is just for all ordinal inscriptions that are known in KV. And then the second one is a separate area where just the news inscriptions are stored. So that way there's not as much filtering or a lot of technical overhead in getting just the news. So if we were to open up one of these endpoints, for example, then you'll see we get a list of keys. And starting from the very beginning, we have over a million indexed, and we've been keeping up with all the recent changes and everything else. You can see a little bit of information about each inscription. Now, the way we've chosen to do this with Cloudflare KV in particular is we have this option of storing metadata alongside every key. So this is a typed out response that we pull. We get this data from the API, and we write this to every key so that you know a little bit of information about it. And the actual content of the key is the content of the inscription. And that allows us to do some pretty cool stuff, which I can demo in a little bit here. But first off, this is a long list. We've got over 1 million entries in here. And even though you only get 1,000 at a time, you literally can progress with this cursor and download and look through all 1 million without a problem. You just got to keep progressing and getting them 1,000 at a time until that's complete. And that's what our indexer is doing currently, although there's probably some ways to make that more efficient in the future. On the other side of that, for the news list itself, you'll see a smaller subset of anything that's been identified to follow the protocol. So if we detect that you have the PONS bit of JSON in there, and if we detect that you have the title, which is the one required field, then you have a valid news inscription. And this list right here represents the very first one, all the way through everything else that we've seen. I think we're sitting at about 258, and we can do some cool things with this. So coming back to that idea of one BTC.news, for example, we can turn around and list all of the recent news in a very easy to digest format. And we can also use this same inscribe.news API to show the content. And just a quick preview of that as well is if you click into one of these, it will load the data from the API, and you'll see that we pull the either markdown, HTML, or if it was plain text, it would even just show just that. But it gives us the ability to do some cool things and being able to display it and being able to show a lot more information. So this was one of the more recent inscriptions here, and you can see these are pretty long form. There's a lot that we can do with it.
And these inscriptions cost like anywhere from $20 to $30 each. And this is like eternal news.
Yes.
So by comparison, the New York Times spends on average about $25,000 in terms of like operating expenses on each article it puts out. And those articles are often edited, and not the edits are not announced later. They're kind of like put in a footnote. Whereas our news feed, for the time being, costs a tiny fraction of that amount and last forever, and are curated by will eventually be curated by Bitcoiners.
Exactly. And that's one of the beautiful things about it. I think on the one BTC News side, as far as roadmap, one of the things that we want to explore is the ability to upvote or possibly downvote different posts, so that when you're looking at the curated feed, we can get the literal opinion of people who own Bitcoin or have done inscriptions or something similar. So that's something we're looking towards building as well, as saying like, hey, I have this inscription that gives me the ability to sign and make an action, like doing an upvote or a downvote or similar. And I love this idea of leveraging the crypto technology that we have at the base layer to do some things that may not have been possible before. So with that in mind, there's definitely a few articles here, a bunch of articles already. And it's a way we can tell our story and make sure that it's heard. So this is one interpretation of like how we see the news standard being used, but there's a ton of possibilities out there for how we can use this in different ways too. One of the early patterns that we saw as we were setting this up, for example, was product announcements. I have this collection of inscriptions, or I have this inscription service, and we just released a new feature. It was cool to see, like, people were actually sharing that news through the Ordinal News Standard. So as much as we're focused on a narrative that involves the story that we want to tell, there's an opportunity here to build your own lane and to build your own index and to build your own ranking system around the same kind of thing. And we're all going to be using the same standard at the base level. Cool. So with the API that we have here, some of the other endpoints that we have are actually pretty useful just in general when it comes to inscriptions, and can also show a little bit more information for the actual news inscriptions, which can be used for integrations. So if we were to take one of the inscription numbers here, like our one that we're looking at right here, and we were to say, okay, what is the info for this one? Well, we get that metadata back that we saw for every key. You get the ID for the inscription number, original address, and some more information. Also the content type, which is useful for when we're looking at things that aren't news inscriptions. And same, if we were to look at what the actual raw content is, in this case, it's a ONS post. And you can see it's very straightforward, doesn't look like it's nearly as pretty as what you see on 1btc.news, but this is what powers it underneath. And if we back up a little bit more, there's two other endpoints here that are specific to the ONS standard. So we have news and data. News was designed so that we could show that information and return you the raw HTML converted through a markdown converter or similar. And it will bring this, you could take this and then be able to integrate it into the website or something similar. And you won't need to do the parsing on your side. There's definitely some small things like the way characters are interpreted and some other things here. And we have that fixed on the 1BTC News side, but this is reminding me that we have a few settings to change on the main standard API here. But all that can be done. It's done with, I want to say it was like rehype HTML and just some common markdown renderers that were available on the React side. And then you also have an endpoint that will give you all of the data around an inscription. So if we know that this is an Ordinal News inscription and we want to get everything at once versus having to hit different endpoints, then we put this one in and you get a combination of the metadata as well as the ONS post and the information there for processing too. So this is actually what we're currently using with the 1BTC News front end. And we're trying to make sure that anything we implement on one side, we can bring back to the standard. And I would definitely encourage anybody else to do the same, because I think building on that base layer is going to help us all be successful as we're looking to move forward. So these are the different endpoints that are available. The code for this is all available on GitHub. So we have an organization. Let me get the little thing out of my way here. So the GitHub for the Ordinal News Standard is here at github.com/ordinalnews. And you'll see the two repositories that power what we're talking about today. We have a front-end client that is used for inscribing the news, formatting it, as well as showing some of the information. And we have the documentation, which is currently running just through Gitbook, but it's nice because then we get the view of both the Gitbook editor and also contributions and changes can be made through GitHub. We have both options. So if there's anything that needs to be updated, anybody can be involved. And we can also discuss what things we want to add to the standard and where we want to build from here in a very open and transparent way. So the Ordinal News client is a very simple React app, and it just uses it powers both the API and it powers the viewer and the pages itself. So you've got kind of 2-in-1 function going on here, where everything in source is related to the website itself. So you'll see the components, the routes, and how we get around. And then everything in functions is using a feature of Cloudflare Pages, where we can run the API, we can make sure we get around our chorus responses, and we have all of the endpoints that I just demoed before right here. So each one of those works based off of the ID. And because the Hero API supports using either the inscription ID itself or using the inscription number, we can actually leverage that as well. So what you see on our data right here, if we were to use this ID instead of the inscription number, we would get exactly the same information. Same goes for viewing the news or doing anything similar. So it gives us some flexibility in how we can approach that. And the ID itself is really the, I guess, immutable reference that we're looking for. And there's currently an open issue in the ORD repository where they're talking about, I guess, around 450, 460,000 inscriptions. There were a bunch that got missed as far as the protocol is concerned. So they're talking about, should we change the numbering or how would that affect things? And definitely encourage people to take a look there. I can share a link afterward and share their opinion based on the things we're building. But in its current state, this is how we have things set up. Cool. Let me get back out of that. All right, so if you were to go to inscribe.news today, you've got two options on the homepage here. One is to actually inscribe the news, and one is to read the documentation. When we go to inscribe the news, we start entering all of the information. And after generating it, it will create our formatted post that needs to be done. And currently, this is just copied and used in another inscription service to write the plain text. So you could do this using ORD. You could use this using a service like Gamma, Ordinals Bot, Ordiment, Unisat, your service of choice. And we did that for the perspective of the protocol because we wanted to give people as many options as possible. So in this sense, there's a ton of different ways that you can get it done, but you're essentially inscribing this text in a format that makes sense. And I believe the indexer would handle it if we did it in JSON instead of plain text. But the standard itself, everything was designed to be done as plain text to keep it as simple as possible. Cool. So that's how inscriptions are happening now. These are how things get inscribed and how the news feed is coming together. And we could see some advancements here too. There's some ways that we could do like URL verification, or, we do if you were able to log in with a wallet, then you could sign the actual message and have a related signature that's provable that you're the author, and lots of things that we can build on top of this system. But we started simple because we thought that was the best way to move forward. And it's been working really well for what we're trying to do. Again, all the code is open source. Happy to bring in any other contributors, happy to have anybody provide feedback on the standard itself. And again, all of the work that we're doing with One BTC News, we're going to point back and try and improve the standard as well. So the repo I have open here, we actually took the same client that was there in the Ordinal News standard, and we started to design it and put it together in a way that we wanted to interpret the news and to show the information. So what you see here on onebtc.news with the ability to view the news or to be able to see the current news feed is actually using the same code base with some advancements. And we're hoping to put the both in lockstep to where we can bring those features back to the standard where they make sense in an open and accessible way. And then we'll start to specialize what we want to do on our end as well. So it's all kind of tied together there. And I will just take a quick pause. I know I covered a whole ton of information there. Just curious if you had any questions, Albert, or where we could head next with this.
Yeah, let me ask a question for all the viewers and all the hackers and all the people participating in the Bitcoin Olympics hackathon. Where can we find this information? Well, I mean, we'll find it in the resource, but I'm guessing after, can you give us a bunch of links and then we'll put it into the resource channel in our Discord so people can hit the ground running with this?
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to copy in everything I have here, and I'm actually in that Discord as well. So I'll get to that post once we're all done. That way everybody has a way to access everything.
Super.
And best communication channels, GitHub is just an easy go-to keep track of things, do project management, and kind of have open discussions. But if there are any specific questions or anything else, I'm available as WoBuddy on Discord, WoBuddy Dev on Twitter. and just happy to help people figure out where they want to take this next, because I see a lot of potential in this idea. And I think that having that collective mind share will help us move forward and figure out what the best next features will be.
Yeah, I think there's a few things going on here. Patrick and I, we touched on this like last week. And I think the thing that excites me most is if we take a look at Bitcoin, there was a growing population of people that are disenchanted, or they see the problem with centralized finance, and so this peer-to-peer cryptocurrency took the world by storm, right? And we know that today that's Bitcoin. And I also feel that right now it's like there's a lot of social pressure building up, because more and more people are aware of how biased or one-sided, or how skewed these centralized news agencies can be and are. I mean, it happens everywhere around the world. And so I think this is also a global phenomenon, just like sort of how Bitcoin was solving that global phenomenon of centralized finance and banking. But this is equally massive in its own way, but in the media. And I think what would be really interesting is if more people from around the world started inscribing news on one BTC.news, and then if we even have like an AI layer on top of it, and takes like one current event, but from the perspective of a bunch of people around the world, and the AI would aggregate that and create a new news article. Now that would be really, really awesome, right? Because I'm just sick and tired of hearing one-sided news, no matter where I go in the world. It's just disgusting.
Yeah,
So
no, for sure.
I see this as the potential to solve that problem once and for all, finally. So I really encourage anybody listening in on this to inscribe news. And the more data we have, right, the closer we will have to like a decentralized media platform where no one person or special interest group or government can influence it, right? And then it really
That's
puts it
right.
into the power of the people. And it's not just like the people of one nation, but people globally. And
Totally.
the interesting thing is I actually sort of there's other speakers have sort of touched on this with their platform. So afterwards, I'd like to make some introductions and see how we can do this together. This is super.
Yeah.
So thanks again, Patrick and Jason, for building this project. Do you have any final encouraging words or inspiring words for the builders before we jump? We have about 3 minutes left. Let's make the most of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'll start. It's funny, when we started learning about inscriptions and we were in the first 10K and we're looking at what happened, it was amazing to see data stored on Bitcoin, because that was a goal that I know we've had from the Stack side. We're like, how can we do more with Bitcoin, and how can we encourage more building on Bitcoin? And what I've seen from the start of that is we're still learning. And early on, of course, being able to inscribe images, going the natural route of NFTs, it made a lot of sense and it was good. But what we really have is this ability to store data, and what that data is and how we use it is going to define like how much meaning we can actually get out of these inscriptions. And it's a big part of why we saw this as a unique standard that we could use for our own product, but also that other people could build on top of. So I'm really looking forward to enabling just kind of new abilities, whether it be around signatures, being able to prove facts, or even linking some things together. And the AI mention is kind of interesting there, because one of the things that's happening now is a lot of the content of the article, like when you're looking at all the different images and other things, they may be hosted elsewhere. But there is a world where those could all be inscribed, and you can use this same self-referential API to pull up the images and to pull up the things so that all of the content is literally coming from the chain. And we've done this with our first news inscription and some of the early ones, and we're still exploring like what it would mean on our side. But I see just a ton of potential here in using this store of data in a way that's very useful for people today and many years from now.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again for doing this technical walkthrough. I hope this helps people start building on top of onebtc.news. Thank you both for putting this project together. I can see it in the future. A few years from now, it's going to be very impactful and very meaningful for our society. I'm really looking forward to it. I also see some. I saw at least one idea that is was inspired by onebtc.news. So let's see what, let's give them some support and see what happens. Also, since you guys on the Discord server, if you guys could do a shout out in the chat, call to action. Hey, if anyone wants to subscribe or build on onebtc.news, reach out to us. Right, and people are forming teams and submitting their ideas. We still have about 13 hours left here. We have about half a day here left. So if you guys have some time, drop in.
Nice.
I'm sure a lot of the builders would be excited to speak with you guys after watching your videos and watching your presentations. Thank you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thanks so much for having us, and looking forward to what's coming next.
Absolutely. Talk soon.
All right,
Bye-bye.
take care.